All right, everyone, get ready, because today we are going deep into the world of somnambulism.
Sleepwalking.
Yeah, but we're not just talking about, like, the walking part, right? We're interested in the mind of the sleepwalker.
Absolutely.
What is going on in there? Are they aware of what's happening? Are they creative? Or is it all just, like, lost in a fog?
It's a question that people have been trying to answer for, like, I mean, literally centuries.
Yeah.
And we still don't really know.
Right.
Yeah.
So to help us try to understand all of this, you've brought us some really interesting excerpts
Yeah.
from the early 1900s,
Mhm.
and they're written by Carl Jung
Yeah,
himself.
that's right.
So it's like a time capsule of early psychological thought, and we are going to be diving specifically into chapter 1 of his book, Psychology of the Unconscious.
Yeah, psychology of the unconscious. And this is really Jung at his best.
Yeah, I bet.
He does not hold back.
He doesn't.
And right away, he challenges this idea that somnambulism is just like, oh, you're just walking in your sleep.
Yeah.
That's it.
Like you're just on autopilot.
Exactly. He says it's more like a systematized partial waking.
Ooh, systematized partial waking.
Ooh, systematized partial waking. I like that.
Yeah,
So it's like they're kind of in both worlds at the same time.
exactly. They're in this kind of in-between state.
Yeah.
They're not fully asleep, but they're not fully awake either.
Okay.
And to really get this point across,
Okay.
he goes into this case study that reads
Right.
more like a psychological thriller
Ooh.
than a medical textbook.
Okay.
I mean, we're not talking about someone like, sleepwalking to the fridge or something.
Right.
His patient is digging up graves.
Well, okay, hold on. You have to tell me more about this.
Yes.
Who is this grave-digging sleepwalker?
So Jung refers to her as SW. SW.
SW.
And she was just 15 years old at the time.
Oh, wow.
And in her, waking life, she was a pretty normal teenager.
But when these episodes would hit,
Yeah.
she would transform.
Like a whole different personality.
Yeah, it was almost like an actress
Oh, wow.
stepping onto a stage.
So it wasn't just sleepwalking. She was, putting on a whole performance.
Exactly.
Wow.
She became this, much more mature,
Yay.
more spiritual, kind of saintly version of herself that she called Ivans.
Ivans,
yeah.
Okay.
And even her speech changed.
Well,
Her mannerisms changed.
everything was different.
Even, her
Wow.
knowledge seemed to be different.
Okay, so that's a little creepy, but also fascinating.
Right?
Yeah, it makes you wonder what was going on beneath the surface.
Yes.
Like in her everyday awareness.
Absolutely. And this is where it gets even more interesting.
Okay.
Because, remember, this was the early 1900s.
Right.
And spiritualism was having a major moment.
Uh-huh.
Seances were all the rage.
Right.
And guess what? SW became like a star medium,
What?
channeling spirits.
Wait, so we're talking actual ghosts here.
Well, not so fast.
Okay.
Jung, he was skeptical.
Sure, I mean, yeah.
So he didn't just take these spirits at face value.
Right.
He analyzed what they were saying and how they were acting.
Okay.
And he started to see them not as supernatural beings, but as expressions of SW's own hidden desires,
So these spirits were actually parts of her own personality.
Exactly.
That's a really interesting way to look at it.
Yeah.
Like her subconscious was putting on this play, and each character was like a different part of herself.
That's a great way to put it. Yeah, these were like fragments of her psyche trying to make themselves heard.
Okay.
Like, for example,
Yeah.
one spirit she channeled was her dead grandfather, who was a clergyman.
Okay.
And when she channeled him, she became very pious, almost preachy.
The voice of her upbringing, maybe?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Like all the expectations of being a good girl.
Yeah.
But then there was this other spirit called Ulrich von Gerbenstein.
Ulrich von Gerbenstein.
Very different. Ulrich was a mischievous flirt.
Oh.
Always cracking jokes,
No.
flirting with the ladies at the seances.
So, the total opposite of her grandfather. So
Exactly.
maybe that was her rebellious side coming out.
Exactly. The part of her that wanted to break free
Okay.
from all those expectations.
And it's so interesting that these spirits only showed up during these sleepwalking episodes, right? Like it was the only time that these unconscious desires could come through.
Exactly.
Okay, this is giving me chills. But
Yeah.
if these spirits were just parts of her,
Mm-hmm.
then what about those grave digging incidents? Where did that come from?
Well, that's where things take a really fascinating turn, because it wasn't just about these different personalities. SW started having these vivid hallucinations.
Really?
Like,
Yeah,
what
yeah.
kind of hallucinations?
Like seeing dead people,
Whoa.
traveling to other worlds, even getting lessons from spirits.
Okay, hold on. This is getting a little spooky now.
How did Jung explain that? Was he starting to believe in the supernatural?
Well, Jung always walked this line between psychology and the supernatural.
Right.
He believed that things like darkness,
Okay.
heightened expectations, even just simple eye fatigue could play a role in hallucinations.
Especially for someone like SW, who was already prone to these altered states of consciousness, right?
Exactly. It was like her sleepwalking was creating this perfect storm
Yeah.
for these visions to emerge.
Like her mind was already primed for these like otherworldly experiences.
Exactly.
But the content of the visions, the spirits, even the things she was doing while sleepwalking, where were all of these ideas coming from?
That is the question.
Yeah.
Was she just making this stuff up?
Yeah.
Well, this is where Jung introduces this really interesting concept called cryptomnesia.
Cryptomnesia, what is that?
It basically means the unconscious recall
Yeah.
of forgotten information.
Oh, so like when you have a great idea and you think it's totally original, but then you realize you actually read something similar years ago and just forgot about it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
cryptomnesia.
So she might have been remembering things she'd seen or heard before, but just didn't realize it.
Precisely.
So maybe she read about these spirits in a book somewhere.
It's possible.
Okay.
And Jung actually found clues that suggest that this was happening.
Oh, really?
For example, during one episode,
Yeah?
SW described this elaborate mystical system
Okay.
with all these like planets and suns and a whole hierarchy of spiritual forces. It's very complicated,
Yeah.
very detailed.
Yeah.
And it seemed impossible that a 15-year-old girl could just come up with all of this.
Right. It's like she was channeling some ancient wisdom or something.
Yeah, exactly.
Mm.
But get this, Jung finds these connections
Okay.
between her descriptions and things that she had been exposed to before, like textbooks that she had skimmed,
Okay.
stories she'd overheard, things she'd never consciously studied,
Oh, wow.
but they had somehow seeped into her unconscious mind.
So her unconscious was like taking all these bits and pieces and creating something new.
Exactly.
But it wasn't totally new. It was like a remix.
Exactly.
Okay, that's kind of freaky, but also really cool.
Yeah, it is. It makes you think about how much of what we think is original is really just like echoes of things we've encountered before.
Wow. Yeah.
And that's what Jung was getting at. This case wasn't just about a sleepwalking girl.
Yeah.
It was about the power of the unconscious mind
Right.
to shape our thoughts, our beliefs, our whole view of the world.
That's mind-blowing. So what you're saying is that our most creative ideas might just be coming from our subconscious.
It's definitely a possibility.
Wow.
Yeah.
This is getting really deep. But before we go any further down that rabbit hole,
Yes.
what about the seances?
Okay.
Did Jung actually think that she was talking to spirits?
That is a great question. And that takes us to the heart of Jung's theory of the unconscious mind.
Okay. I'm on the edge of my seat. Tell me more.
Yeah.
Okay, so we're talking about seances, spirits, this idea that SW's unconscious mind was, like, putting on this whole show.
Yes.
But how did he think it was actually working?
Well, Jung believed the answer was in what he called automatisms.
Automatism.
Yeah.
What are those?
So think about actions or behaviors that just kind of happen
Okay.
without you really thinking about them.
Oh, like when you're driving and then suddenly you realize you can't remember the last, like, 5 miles?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Your body's just on autopilot
Right.
while your mind is somewhere else.
Yeah. Okay.
But with SW, these automatisms were much more, I guess you could say complex,
Okay.
more dramatic,
Okay.
like the table turning
Oh, yeah.
during the seances.
So you mean he thought she wasn't actually faking it? Like her unconscious was actually moving the table?
Well, Jung really delved into the psychology of this
Okay.
table turning thing.
Uh-huh.
And he explored how, like, unconscious motor phenomena can happen, even in people who aren't, like, typically prone to these things,
Okay.
you know. And he described these really subtle, like, almost invisible muscle tremors
Okay.
that we all have,
Uh-huh.
and how they can be influenced by our thoughts and expectations.
So it's like our bodies are always sending these little signals.
Yeah.
And our unconscious mind can like tap into that and make them bigger.
Exactly.
Okay.
He even said that, like, with enough practice, some people could learn to control these tremors
Wow.
and actually influence the movement of the table.
Wait, are you saying people can move stuff with their minds?
Well, not like telekinesis or anything, more about muscle control.
Okay.
And knowing how to amplify those tiny movements with an object, like a table.
Okay.
But for SW, he suggested that the suggestion of table turning and like the expectation of these spirits, that was enough to trigger those unconscious movements.
So her unconscious was moving the table, but it was fueled by everyone else's beliefs and expectations.
Right. Especially with like, spiritualism being so popular.
Right. It was like the perfect environment.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's all around her.
So what about the actual content of the seances, like the personalities, the messages?
Well, Jung thought cryptomnesia was a big part of that too.
Okay.
You know how we talk about her unconscious being really good at piecing things together?
Right.
Yeah, so he believed she was pulling from things she had read or heard
Okay.
or experienced, even if she didn't remember it.
Like her brain was just like a giant sponge absorbing everything around her.
Yeah.
Oh.
And then using those pieces to create these like really elaborate experiences.
I see. So give me an example.
Okay, so one of the spirits that she channeled spoke in a very particular North German dialect.
Oh, wow.
And SW had no knowledge of that dialect.
Okay.
But guess what?
What?
A frequent guest at her house
Uh-huh.
spoke with that exact dialect.
So her unconscious just picked it up and made it part of this whole spirit personality.
Exactly.
Oh, wow. Okay, and then there's automatic writing.
Yes.
What about that? I've always been a little skeptical of that one.
Right.
What's the psychology behind that?
Well, Jung said that even the suggestion of writing can trigger unconscious hand movements. Like it might start with scribbles,
Okay.
but through this process of auto-suggestion, the scribbles become letters
Okay.
and words
Uh-huh.
and eventually sentences.
So autosuggestion is like kind of like the placebo effect.
Yeah, kinda. It's
Uh-huh.
about how powerful suggestion can be
Okay.
to make us think or behave in certain ways.
Okay.
In this case, those initial movements, they're like a suggestion to the unconscious.
I see.
And it's like it's saying, oh, we're writing now. Okay, let's see what we come up with.
And then where do the words come from?
Cryptomnesia,
Of course.
pulling from that big library of information
Right.
and weaving it all together
Yeah.
in these like spontaneous writings.
Yeah. So it's motor impulses and suggestion and forgotten memories. That's wild.
Yeah, it is.
So if the unconscious is so powerful, why doesn't it just talk to us directly?
Well, Jung says it's not that simple.
Okay.
The unconscious can't always break through to our conscious mind. There are barriers, resistances, often from, our upbringing, society, even our own fears.
So it's like the unconscious is trying to talk to us, but it has to use this like secret code.
Yeah, it's like a different language.
Right.
The language of symbols and dreams,
Okay.
intuitions.
And it needs these automatisms like seances or automatic writing, even hallucinations
Yeah.
to translate the message.
Exactly.
Okay. So how do we learn this language?
Well, Jung believed the key was something called individuation.
Individuation.
Yes, basically a journey in self-discovery,
Okay.
where we confront our, he called them shadow selves.
Shatter selves? Is that like our dark side?
Well, not necessarily dark, but definitely parts of ourselves that we don't like to look at.
Yeah.
It's about bringing them into the light,
Eh.
integrating them into a whole self.
So how does SW fit into this?
Well, on one hand, her somnambulism could be seen as this, like, unconscious attempt at individuation.
Like her mind was trying to work through all these parts of herself.
Exactly.
Right. Okay.
But remember how we talked about the influence of culture and suggestion?
Yes.
Jung was worried that her somnambulism was getting caught up in all this spiritualism stuff.
So it might not have been totally authentic.
Yeah, exactly. He wasn't saying that spiritual experiences aren't real, but he was concerned about the power of suggestion,
Right.
that maybe these experiences could become a form of escapism rather than a path to becoming whole.
So it's like her unconscious was using the language of spiritualism because that's what was available.
Right.
But it might not have been telling the whole story.
Exactly.
Okay, so where does this all go? Does she eventually get better?
Well, that's a question for our next segment.
So what happens to SW? Does she end up, like, overcoming her sleepwalking? Does she find her path?
Well, the source material, like, we only get a glimpse into a certain period of her life.
Right.
So it's hard to say for sure.
Okay.
But Jung noticed that, like, near the end of his study, her episodes, they became less frequent
Okay.
and less intense.
Hmm.
Even the visions, they weren't as vivid.
Interesting.
And the personalities, they started to fade.
So maybe, like, her unconscious was kind of merging all those different parts together.
It's possible, yeah.
Like, all the drama wasn't necessary anymore.
Yeah, like maybe that was needed at first,
Okay.
to bring everything to the surface.
Right.
But once it was out in the open,
Yeah.
it didn't have as much power.
I see. So what about that mystical system she came up with? Did Jung ever figure out where it came from?
Ah, Yes, the mystical system.
It's one of the most interesting parts of this whole thing.
It is.
Yeah.
And, Jung's investigation into this, it actually led to one of his most important theories.
Okay, now I really want to know.
Yeah.
What did he find?
So remember how we talked about how complex it was?
Mm-hmm.
With all the planets and suns and spiritual forces?
Yes.
Well, Jung was trying to figure out if she had just, put it together from different things she'd heard or read, or if it was something else entirely.
So he was looking for the source of her inspiration.
Yeah, exactly. And what he found was both kind of insightful and also a little bit unsettling.
Okay.
Some of the names and ideas, they actually resembled Gnostic ideas.
Gnosticism, what is that?
It was this, religious and philosophical movement.
Okay.
Really early on in Christianity.
All right.
Lots of mystical ideas about, God and the universe.
Okay, and how could a 15-year-old girl in the early 1900s even know about this stuff?
Right. That's what Jung thought, too.
Yeah.
He looked everywhere.
Okay.
Like maybe she found a book.
Right.
Or there were some Gnostic groups in her area.
Like he was trying to find a direct link.
Yes, like some proof she'd encountered it in real life. Nothing,
what-
couldn't find any evidence.
Yeah. So what did he think?
Well, he started to consider a pretty radical idea.
Okay, tell me.
What if those Gnostic ideas, what if they didn't come from anywhere outside of her?
Whoa, okay.
What if they came from a deeper part of the unconscious?
Okay.
A part he called the collective unconscious.
The collective unconscious, what's that?
It's one of Jung's most famous, but also most controversial ideas.
Okay.
He thought that in addition to our own personal unconscious, like our own memories and experiences,
Right.
there's this deeper level
Okay.
that everyone shares.
So it's like we're all connected to this one giant mind.
Kind of, yeah.
Wow.
And Jung believed this collective unconscious, it holds these primordial images
Okay.
and symbols and patterns.
Yeah.
He called them archetypes.
Archetypes, like what?
Like, think of the hero's journey,
Okay.
or the wise old man, the mother goddess. These universal themes we see everywhere.
Oh, yeah.
In stories and myths all over the world.
Right, they show up everywhere. So Jung thought maybe her mystical system came from these archetypes.
That was his theory, yeah.
Wow, that's pretty amazing.
It's like she was channeling something much bigger than herself.
Did he ever figure it out for sure?
Jungian psychology is all about embracing the unknown.
Okay.
He said cryptomnesia couldn't be ruled out completely.
Right.
But he also said she could have been tapping into something much deeper.
So maybe it was a little bit of both.
Exactly. It's all about the power of the unconscious.
Right.
Whether it's our own memories or this, shared well of human experience.
Well, this has been quite a journey. We've covered a lot of ground.
We have.
Sleepwalking, seances, the collective unconscious.
It all started with a girl who walked in her sleep.
Yeah. And it's amazing how this one case study can open up so many big questions.
It is. It really makes you think.
It does, and I think that's a good place to leave it for today.
Yeah.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into somnambulism and the unconscious mind.
It was a pleasure.
We hope you've learned something new, and maybe you'll even start listening to the whispers of your own unconscious. Who knows what you might discover?